Quick question. Do your end users always, and I mean always, without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this question: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. Check it out at onepassword.com/XAM. That's onepassword.com/XAM.
Packet pushers.
Welcome to Packet Protector, the podcast at the intersection of networking and security. I'm Drew Conry Murray. JJ's away this week. On today's show, cyber insurance. The goal of cyber insurance is to provide protection against financial loss caused by a security incident, say a ransomware payment or data recovery costs, legal expenses, and, I'm air quoting here, reputational damage. But how does an insurance provider measure the risk of a potential customer? What controls does a provider want to see in place? And how does that provider assess whether those controls are effective? My guest, Joe Stern, is here to help us answer these and other questions. Joe is VP of IT for a market research company and the proud holder of a cyber insurance policy. Joe was also a guest way back in episode 6. Joe, welcome back to the podcast. And just to help set a little context, can you give us a little bit of information about the company or sort of the risk environment you're operating in?
Hi, Drew. I work for a professional services company. We do market research and analytics work for all kinds of different customers. Sometimes they're assessing data about their customers themselves or about their employees or about the market that they want to enter. In all these cases, they either give us a lot of data to sniff and slice, or they ask us to collect data on their behalf. The risks, of course, tend to come around PII because oftentimes it's either in the data they're giving us or it's data that we're collecting. And we need to be always so careful about how we handle that.
So getting cyber insurance, was this an initiative you brought up? Is this something that somebody else in the company wanted to do? How did it come about?
It was understood that this is a thing that you simply have to have in the 21st century. I can't remember when we first acquired it. I think it came from a decision point above me at that time. If I was entering into a situation now, that's one of the first questions I would want to find out is who's the carrier, how much do we have, and what kinds of things are included in this policy.
Right. Okay, so this wasn't like a fight you had to have or a board you needed to convince. This was kind of a done deal already.
It is a done deal. I think having a business without cyber insurance is an incredibly risky thing. And I work for a risk-averse organization. They take security seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But even if they were a little bit of a cowboy organization and overly permissive with things, the agreements that we have with our clients, the master services agreements that we sign, they all stipulate you will carry insurance at an appropriate level.
Okay. So do you have insight then in how the organization went about choosing a provider?
They went with a broker. The cyber insurance carrier may be different from year to year and has been because the broker that we work with knows our business and does the shopping on our behalf, presents us with a binder and says, here are the choices that are probably best for you. And this is the most affordable one relative to the coverage that you're getting.
So are you sort of paying an overhead then to have the broker do this for you?
They get a commission, but it's not necessarily more expensive than it would be shopping ourselves.
And you decided to go with a broker. Why? Just because they could do a lot of that research for you, or?
Exactly. And we're not staffed adequately to pursue these kinds of investigations on our own in a meaningful way. It's much better to hand over that task to somebody who's seen all the presentations and read all the PDFs and has a sense. Because in some ways, insurance is a commodity. You're buying dollars of coverage, and they're not the ones that are going to be fixing the leaks and cleaning up the dank carpet after the flood. They're going to be the ones who are paying the providers and the professionals that come in. So I feel like it doesn't matter so much which cyber insurance provider you end up with, as long as you have the necessary coverage and know the framework you're operating in.
Okay, so that's a good point to take off then. I know this is sensitive, but what sort of coverage were you looking to get? Were there specific issues you were looking for protection from, or how did that play out?
My main concern was when I need to call in specialty troops, will they work with me and get who I need? In the process of a lot of incident response drills, I see how the plan is supposed to work. I'm fortunate that I've never actually had to push the red button for real. But what's going to happen in the event of a disaster where you need cybersecurity is you're going to have this ill feeling that something is wrong. Maybe it's telemetry that's showing you signals you've never seen before. Maybe it's your SOC calling you up and saying, hey, what's this thing going on? Is that authorized? Are you expecting that? Are you getting pen tested today? And when you realize that there is possibly an incident, then you make a couple calls in quick succession. First, you call the breach attorney, which is probably provided to you from a menu by your cyber insurance provider.
A breach attorney?
A breach attorney.
Okay, this is a new term for me, so we need to unpack that.
Oh, sure. Here's what we do in the event of a crisis. I call an answering machine and I leave a very vague message saying, hi, I'm having a bad day. Can you please call me back?
This is like a scene out of Breaking Bad here.
And within 15 minutes, it might be 11:30 p.m. on Christmas Eve. It doesn't matter. Some attorney is going to call me back and we're going to have a privileged conversation. And I can tell all my unhappy truths to this person. If I had RDP open to the internet or something, I would tell. I wouldn't hold back. Note to the listeners, I don't.
Right. Also note to the breach attorney.
The point of having the breach attorney is that the conversation is privileged. Anything I say can't be discovered. And furthermore, when the breach attorney says, ooh, sounds like you've got a raging clop infection. You know who the best people to handle that are? That's Mandiant. They'll bring in Mandiant. They have the right people to call. They've got preferred rates. And most of all, they've got the privilege to keep this whole conversation confidential. Nobody has to know about it. Now, I take them at their word that they know the best people for each job. If there was somebody in particular I wanted to use to solve a problem, I can say, hey, can we use this firm? I've worked with their analysts before. They know our network inside and out. If they are cleared on the breach attorney's panel, then it should be smooth. Now, I said there are a bunch of calls I need to make. As soon as I have left my message on the answering machine, I'm calling the cyber insurance hotline because they demand to be the first to know, or second to know in this case.
Okay, so breach attorney first, then the cyber insurance hotline.
And the cyber insurance. It's not a good plan to investigate this incident myself, or maybe with the SOC, with the free hours that are included of incident response for a week, and then say, you know what, this is bigger than me. I'm going to call in cyber insurance. Cyber insurance does not like to be late to the invitation.
Sure.
So you've got them, you left a message probably, and you've talked to the breach attorney. And the breach attorney calls you back and says, okay, this is what we're going to do next. At this point, you are still taking basic mop-up actions. For example, if you have rogue actors in your network, you're trying to isolate their north-south traffic out and their east-west traffic on the inside. You are making sure that your logs are safe, making sure that your backups are safe. You're turning off the VPN connections to all of your remote sites. These are things that are spelled out in the incident response plan.
And is this an incident response plan that you developed with the cyber insurance provider or your own incident response plan?
We developed it ourselves, and over time, we've shared it with various consultants who've offered suggestions and made some gentle corrections. One of the things that is very important to everybody who evaluates it that it was not obvious to me was you really need to triage your incident and categorize how serious it is. Because when you call that answering machine, you need to either say, I think this is a little thing, or this is a big thing, and we need to get paratroopers out of the helicopter right now. The cyber insurance may not cover helicopters. It's probably excluded. The cyber insurance will pay for X million dollars worth of trouble resolution. Now, it's not like Cyberman comes and opens his wallet and flicks out a couple $1 million bills and says, here, we'll dispatch you. No, what they do is they say, you go ahead and pay for these things and then send us the invoice and we'll reimburse you. There's no way in which a cybersecurity event ever gets totally balanced by your insurance. You're going to be out of pocket quite a bit of money, at least temporarily.
Sure.
The other thing is that at least our policy is, I think you would call it stacked, where one of the things that happens if you have a PII leakage and a data breach is you have a lot of regulatory work to do. You've got to send letters that say, we take security very seriously to thousands of people. And you have to pay fines. And you, of course, have to get the paratroopers in to evict the bad actor from your network. Those are three completely different categories of claims. And you're limited to X million dollars for each of them. But at the same time, the total amount for any event can't be X million. Let's pick a number. It's not my number. If you had $20 million of coverage and you spent $4 million on sending out all those letters and $6 million on evicting the bad guy, you're 10 out of 20 to the limit.
Okay, so that's what they mean by stacking then. All these different things, they're adding them up and saying at some point you're going to hit the limit.
Yeah, they'll pay the limit in any dimension, but all the dimensions total are also subject to the same limit.
Okay, that makes sense. When you are looking at a cyber insurance policy, is it just related to security incidents, or do you also have coverage for things like, natural disasters that result in a business loss, key personnel loss, that kind of thing? Or is that a separate deal?
That has always been a separate policy, often from a separate carrier. We have other coverage for other things, and that's one of the things that the broker does for you is bundle different packages together that can save you some money. For example, professional liability, image, reputation, professional malfeasance. When an officer goes rogue.
Yes. Let's pause for a message from today's sponsor, 1Password. Imagine your company's security is like the quad of a college campus. There are nice brick paths between the buildings. Those are the company-owned devices, IT-approved apps, and managed employee identities. And then there are the paths people actually use, the shortcuts worn through the grass to the actual straightest line from point A to B. Those are the unmanaged devices, shadow IT apps, and non-employee identities like contractors. And most security tools only work on those happy brick paths, but lots of security problems take place on the shortcuts. 1Password Extended Access Management is the first security solution that brings all these unmanaged devices, apps, and identities under your control. It ensures that every user credential is strong and protected, every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. 1Password Extended Access Management solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't. It's security for the way we work today, and it's now generally available to companies with Okta and Microsoft Entra, and in beta for Google Workspace customers. Check it out at onepassword.com/XAM. That's onepassword.com/XAM. And now back to the podcast. So one thing I'm really curious about is how providers assess risk. Do you have a sense of how that happened in your organization?
Yeah, it was unimpressive. I filled out a security questionnaire.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
This is a systemic problem in the industry. One of the things that we're all responsible for in this modern era is assessing the health of our supply chain. And our clients put me through some miserable exercises where I have to answer questions in Excel, a data collection tool nobody should ever have to use. And they say things like, do you have blue security? You only can answer yes or no.
Mhm.
They lack nuance. The questions are assessed by people who don't understand the business, but have been trained on the binary joy of checklists.
Uh-huh.
I suspect that whatever I put into that Excel sheet was not truly evaluated for how likely it was or how reasonable it was. They just took me at my word.
Okay. That's really fascinating. So it's just a questionnaire from the insurance provider and that's it. And then they come up with a number based on your responses.
That's all it was. Although, as I think about it, if they were underwriting anything else, would they do it differently? Would they come and spend a week at my desk watching me? How would they really understand my security posture?
That's true.
They can look at similar sized businesses and make educated guesses, like an actuary.
Well, that's one of the things I was wondering was organizations often have sort of other risk or compliance efforts that they have to have, like PCI or other things. So I was assuming that they would try to glom onto that, like, do you have this in place? Can you provide records of that? But it didn't sound like they were doing any of that.
That's true. Maybe if I had a SOC 2 report to give them, they would have taken that into consideration, but we're not that kind of business.
Okay, so maybe it is business dependent then. And how often do you have to fill out this questionnaire?
Whenever we change providers. So, for example, at renewal time, if we are transitioned by our broker to a new provider, I will probably have to answer a bunch of questions.
Based on the questionnaires, do you have a sense then of how the insurance company is kind of assessing you as a risk and deciding what premium to charge you? Like, are they asking for things like what kind of security controls you have in place? Are they getting vendor specific? What does the questionnaire kind of detail?
Typically, they want to know, do you commit any of the 7 deadly sins? Like let users run amok with local admin.
Mhm.
Do you have a firewall? Do you have a risk register? Do you allow certain kinds of traffic? They want to find out if you have all the basics, and it sounds like they're always sort of reacting to last year's security events.
Mhm.
I would imagine very much that the next questionnaire I fill out is going to be very excited about file transfer appliances on the perimeter of my network,
Okay.
whereas previously they hadn't asked about that.
Okay, that's interesting. It doesn't sound like the insurance company is coming in and suggesting, hey, maybe you would want to have this control in place or do this differently. Because my assumption is they want to minimize their risk of having to pay out, so they have a vested interest in you doing things properly.
I would say that's true. They don't collect any data from us. Like the car insurance says, hey, why don't you just put this app on your smartphone and let us watch you drive?
Right.
They don't do anything like that.
Uh-huh.
They do offer suggestions on security hygiene. All of them offer some discounts with security providers. For example, if you're a business and you have cyber insurance, your cyber insurance probably has a page where they offer discounts on things like phishing tests or password vaults,
Hmm.
other security as a service things that you can buy.
Hmm.
Is it a bargain? I mean, it's like clipping coupons. Sometimes you end up buying things that you weren't going to buy anyway.
Hmm.
Sometimes you get introduced to a new vendor or even a new kind of security product. I will say a couple insurance providers ago, they offered a discount on password vaulting. And I had always wanted to give password vaults to set up a password vaulting solution,
Hmm.
but I couldn't quite manage to get that over the budget hurdle. And then once cyber insurance paid for half of it, it became an established thing. And though they dropped that benefit, or it turned out it was deeply discounted that first year, after that you renewed at full price.
Right, right.
The camel's nose was already in the tent. I had it. Other things that I got because of cyber insurance were the freemium versions of things like Security Scorecard and BitSite, an ability to analyze my company from the outside and see what it looks like to other people. And this is information that is an interesting new commodity for sale as you're trying to evaluate your supply chain. You can buy these services that say, hey, tell us who your suppliers are and we'll tell you what they look like. And at the same time, they're selling you to other organizations where you're a supplier.
Hmm.
For a while, I was getting a free look at how we looked, and then that provider canceled that benefit. But like I said, it's an interesting little shopping bazaar of discounts. Some of them good, some of them forgettable.
But you have taken advantage of them.
I have taken advantage of them for sure.
So what triggers a payout? I know we sort of walked through the process, but I guess I'm curious, like how much pushback is there from an insurance provider on whether they actually are required to pay you?
I haven't ever tested it, but my understanding is that if you do it by the books, you've worked through a breach attorney that's on their list, approved by them, and you hire a provider that is on their panel, then you can submit the invoices and they'll reimburse you. The likelihood of you spending $40,000 or $5 million or $20 million with Mandiant only to discover that they didn't think you had an incident, that seems pretty unlikely. I don't think it would get quite that far if you do it by the books.
Hmm.
But if you just cowboy it, if you just call companies that say we offer incident response and then try and hand over a fistful of receipts, that might not work.
Okay, so you feel like you're comfortable because you are going with lawyers and incident response vendors that are aligned with the cyber insurance provider.
That's right. I'm staying inside the network if this was a PPO.
Right.
Drew, I want to share something that I think could be useful.
Mhm.
When we did a tabletop exercise to test out our incident response plan, I had, as many people would, deeply reviewed the incident response plan the morning of the tabletop.
Uh-huh.
And so as we went through the exercise, we did pretty well. And I felt very confident in our decision making and our responsiveness. But when the report came, we got dinged. The guy said, you guys really do seem to have a good cultural knowledge of how this whole security thing works, but you didn't appear to look at your incident response plan at all during the exercise. And I realized, that's really important because if you don't look at the IR plan while you are actually in the moment, you might skip the step that says call this, then call that, and then proceed instead of trying to put the fire out.
Okay.
And so every tabletop exercise I've done since then, I make a point of, even though I know the right answer, finding it in the IR plan and saying so before I move on to the next step.
Just letting the person running the tabletop exercise know you're actually checking your IR plan.
Yes, and also building muscle memory. I want to make sure that when the time comes, I remember to pull the 3-ring binder down off the shelf and start following the steps instead of guessing. Because under stress, you could easily miss that step, and that would mean no cyber insurance payment.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I wanted to circle back on as you're talking about sort of the process for if you're responding to an incident and you're invoking the lawyer and then the cyber insurance company, it also sounds like you are also proceeding with your own incident response plan, trying to put out the fire get rid of the bad actor, all the other steps you talked about. And it sounds like you're not saying, well, I'll just wait until my insurance company says, okay, now put out the fire. You're taking steps and not worrying about whether that's going to impact a payout down the line. Like, I guess I'm wondering, would an insurance provider say, oh, you screwed up and violated this policy by doing XYZ as part of your response to the incident, and so we're not going to pay you?
That would be a terrible thing, wouldn't it? I sure hope that doesn't happen. I feel like there are reasonable steps that one can and should take as an incident is snowballing. I can't imagine it's ever proper to sit on your hands and just watch and wait.
I guess the larger question is, do you feel like the relationship with your cyber insurance provider is adversarial in that you feel like I need to dot every I and cross every T to make sure I'm going to get a justifiable payout from them, and they're looking to ding you on anything they can to prevent paying out? I guess that's how I feel like insurance companies work. So,
You're right. At this point, it's all based on vibes. I don't know.
okay.
I haven't had a bad experience. I haven't had the good kind either.
Mhm. Okay, well, that's good to know. Do you feel like there's sufficient competition for your business in the cyber insurance market?
I'm insulated from that quite a bit. One rule of thumb I think that the company uses is that I want to be cagey here without saying too much.
Mhm.
The total amount of cyber insurance coverage we have is a fraction of our annual revenue.
Mhm.
And it probably also takes into account cash on hand, what we could afford to scrounge up if we needed it to get through an incident.
Mhm.
The one thing that as a company we have all agreed is probably true is can't imagine that we would ever pay ransom. That's not one of the things that we're thinking about when we're talking about cyber insurance coverage.
Mhm.
Although that is definitely in the portfolio of services. When I mentioned they'll pay out in dimensions, that's one of the dimensions.
Right, right. They'll pay out whatever you paid in, or some percentage of whatever you paid as a ransom is an option you can take. Yeah.
Right. And there must be competition for the business. At some point, the rates get beyond a point that the business wants to pay.
Mhm.
Fortunately, we've not been in that position. I imagine it would be much worse if we had filed a claim.
Uh-huh.
But as it stands, we let our broker do the fighting for us and they tell us what's available at what price.
Okay. Is there anything else you think listeners should know about cyber insurance if they don't have it, if they're thinking about it, if they do have it and they want to maximize it?
Going back through the times I've done it, I want to say revisit the introduction page that they offer and see what the recommended steps are to make sure that you are operating within the system. Because once you go outside the system, their likelihood of paying you goes way down.
Okay.
You want to familiarize yourself with the concept of that breach attorney. They certainly have one, and I'm sure all these attorneys would offer a 1 hour consultation for free to start so you can get to know each other. It turns out that the nationally recognized firm that we chose is actually headquartered here in the city where I'm calling from.
Okay. So you could actually visit them if you really felt like you wanted to.
Yeah, I could. I could show up and pull my pockets inside out and say, please help. I like the idea that they'll be advocates on my behalf. And I like the idea that they'll have relationships that I won't. If I were to call up one of these incident response firms, they've never heard of me. They don't have any agreements with me.
Mhm.
None of that is set up. But there's a lot less paperwork obstacle involved when you go through the breach attorney.
And just to clarify, is the breach attorney affiliated with the cyber insurance provider, or is that a separate thing?
Separate business. In fact,
Okay.
the cyber insurance company offered a few different choices.
Mhm. So the cyber insurance company said, here's the breach attorneys we work with. Do you want one of them?
Yes.
Okay.
Except the do you want one of them was phrased more as pick one.
Okay. So you did go with one that they recommended, but it turned out to be local to you as well.
Interestingly, we went with one with the previous carrier. And when our carrier switched last, I contacted the breach attorney and said, do you work with new carrier? And they
Mhm.
said, oh, yeah, sure. We work with all of them.
Okay. So that's also something to keep in mind, that if you find a breach attorney you like, again, it's like a PPO network. You can keep your doctor, hopefully, as you move among insurance providers.
That's right. Like my breach attorney. That's relationship goals.
A weird relationship.
The incident response drilling is, of course, important. Everybody should be doing tabletop exercises. You got to find the time. And if not, it also is good face time with the board or whoever is managing at levels higher than IT in your company.
Doing a tabletop exercise?
Yeah, let them feel the stress.
Okay. And I will note, just to plug Packet Protector, we did do an episode on tabletop exercises. I'll drop that link in the show notes. And I will also drop Joe's previous episode link in the show notes. Anything else, Joe, before we wrap?
No, that's everything. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great conversation. Are you online? Do you have a blog? Do you have anything you want to promote?
Nah, I'm very low visibility.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Joe.
Reduced attack surface area.
Thank you, Joe, for being here. And of course, thanks to the listeners for joining us for another episode of Packet Protector. If you have a topic you want us to cover, you can find us on LinkedIn or at packetpushers.net/community, where you can join our free Slack channel with other IT and security pros. If you have a comment, a correction, or a question, you can reach out at packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up, and we appreciate when listeners do reach out. And as always, eat your security vegetables.